The digital clock on the bedside table read 1:15 a.m. when Jonathan Ramsey entered the bedroom. Evelyn Crestwood did not move. She remained on her side of the king-sized bed, her breathing even, simulating sleep. The only sign of her awareness was the slight tension in her jaw. Jonathan moved with a practiced quiet, an economy of motion designed not to disturb. He placed his briefcase by the door and began to undress in the low light from the hallway. Evelyn's eyes opened a fraction. She observed him. His movements were heavy, weighted with an exhaustion that seemed to go beyond a long day at his architecture firm. As he removed his suit jacket, an unfamiliar scent reached her. It was not the clean, sterile smell of his downtown Summit Creek office building, nor the faint aroma of expensive cologne. It was a chemical sharpness, like industrial cleaning fluid. When he draped his trousers over the valet stand, she saw a dark, fresh grease stain near the cuff. It was small, but it was there. "Long night?" she asked, her voice neutral. He started, his shoulders jumping. "Evelyn! I thought you were asleep. The bid for the waterfront project must be intense," she stated. It was not a question. "It is," he said, his back still to her as he pulled on a clean t-shirt. "We're down to the wire. A lot of late nights ahead." He did not elaborate. He slipped into bed, turned his back to her, and was silent. Within minutes, his breathing deepened into genuine sleep. Evelyn remained awake for another hour, staring at the ceiling, cataloging the discrepancies. The smell, the stain, the practiced, weary silence. The next morning, while Jonathan was in the shower, Evelyn retrieved his trousers from the valet stand. She took them to the laundry room under the pretense of starting a load of whites. In the clear light of the utility room, she examined the stain. It was thick, automotive grease. She went through his pockets, an act she had not performed in the first 10 years of their marriage. She found a wallet, keys, and a crumpled receipt. She smoothed it out on the cold surface of the washing machine. It was from the 24-hour express diner, time-stamped 11:47 p.m. the previous night. The address was on Industrial Route 7, a desolate strip of warehouses and trucking depots miles from his glass and steel office tower. The purchase was for a single black coffee and a day-old donut. The total was $2.15. The detail was incongruous with his story of a high-stakes project meeting. Clients were not entertained at truck stops. Bids were not finalized over stale pastries. She folded the receipt and placed it in the small enameled box in her jewelry drawer, where she kept items of significance. This, she had decided, was significant. 3 days later, Jonathan introduced the new maid. The previous one, a stern woman in her 60s, had quit without notice, citing a family emergency. Jonathan had handled the replacement himself. "Evelyn, this is Grace," he said, gesturing to the young woman, standing nervously in their marble-floored foyer. Grace was perhaps 20 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, and eyes that refused to meet Evelyn's. She was thin, dressed in simple, functional clothes that seemed a size too large. Evelyn's assessment was immediate and clinical. The girl was out of her element. "The agency sent her over this morning," Jonathan explained. "She comes highly recommended." "I didn't receive any paperwork from the agency," Evelyn noted, her gaze fixed on Grace. "It's all being processed. They're swamped," Jonathan said quickly. He turned to Grace, his tone shifting. "Your duties will be straightforward. General cleaning of the common areas, the living room, kitchen, dining room, and our bedroom, of course. My office," he pointed down the hall, "is off limits. I have sensitive project materials in there. Under no circumstances are you to enter." The instruction was overly specific, the emphasis too sharp. Evelyn watched Grace nod, her eyes wide. She seemed less like a professional cleaner, and more like a child receiving a warning. Evelyn extended a hand. "Welcome, Grace. We expect punctuality and discretion." Grace's handshake was brief and damp. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." Over the next week, Evelyn observed. Grace was diligent, quiet, and efficient. She was also watchful. She moved through the large modern house, as if she were a ghost, cleaning surfaces, and then disappearing into the small staff room adjacent to the laundry. The interactions between her and Jonathan were minimal and correct, at least when Evelyn was present. But there was a current beneath the surface, a shared understanding that excluded her. Evelyn saw it in the way Grace would flinch slightly when Jonathan entered a room, and in the way Jonathan's eyes would find Grace for a fraction of a second too long. The suspicion, once a seed planted by a grease stain and a receipt, began to sprout. It was nourished by the late nights that became more frequent, by the vague excuses that offered no detail, and by the presence of a silent young woman who now occupied the periphery of her home. Evelyn felt a familiar coldness settle in her chest. She had built her life with the same precision and care that Jonathan applied to his architectural designs. She would not allow a flaw in the foundation to go unexamined. She needed to know what was happening in the shadows of her marriage. Evelyn met her friend, Heather Monroe, for lunch at a rooftop restaurant overlooking Summit Creek. The sun was bright, the view expansive, but Evelyn's focus was narrow. She methodically cut her salmon into precise, identical pieces. "He came home at 2 a.m. last night," Evelyn began, without preamble. "He said it was a client dinner that ran late. When I called the restaurant he named, they confirmed they closed at 11. Heather took a slow sip of her Chardonnay. She was a woman who had navigated 2 divorces, both initiated by her discovery of infidelity. She considered herself an expert in the field of marital decay. "The lies get lazy when they get comfortable, Ev. That's the first rule. And the new maid, Grace. She's young, too young. She watches him, and he watches her." "The classic cliché," Heather said, a cynical smile touching her lips. "Rich man, young maid. It's practically a theatrical trope. You can't let sentiment cloud your judgment. You need facts. You need irrefutable proof before you make a single move." "What kind of proof?" Evelyn asked, her voice flat. "Something he can't deny. Photos, videos, a record of his movements. You can't confront him with a feeling or a discrepancy about restaurant hours. He'll just lie better next time. He'll call it a misunderstanding. He'll make you feel like you're the crazy one." Heather leaned forward, her voice dropping. "I used a man after my second husband started his golf weekends. He was discreet, thorough, and he delivered. His name is Caleb Price." She took a pen from her purse and wrote a name and number on a cocktail napkin. "Don't go into battle without ammunition." Evelyn took the napkin. The paper was cool against her fingers. The name, Caleb Price, felt less like a recommendation and more like a weapon. The next afternoon, Evelyn was seated in a small, nondescript office in a building downtown. The sign on the door read, "Price Investigations." Caleb Price was a man in his 50s, with a tired face and eyes that seemed to have registered every possible human failing. He did not offer pleasantries. He gestured to a chair and waited. "My friend, Heather Monroe, recommended you," Evelyn stated. Price nodded. "Mrs. Monroe was a client. Confidentiality prevents me from discussing her case." "I understand," Evelyn said. "I require a similar service. My husband is Jonathan Ramsey." She slid a folder across the desk. It contained a recent photograph of Jonathan, his car's make, model, and license plate number, and the address of his architecture firm. "He claims to be working late most nights. I need to know his actual location and activities from 6 p.m. onward. I want a detailed timeline, photographic evidence, and a full report on anyone he meets." Price opened the folder and examined the contents. He looked from the photograph of the smiling, handsome man to the impassive woman sitting before him. "Surveillance is billed at a daily rate plus expenses." Woman sitting before him. "I require a 2-week retainer up front." He named a figure that would have caused most people to flinch. Evelyn did not hesitate. She opened her checkbook, wrote the amount, and signed her name with a firm, steady hand. "So I expect daily updates via a secure email address, and I expect total discretion." "My discretion is what you're paying for, Mrs. Crestwood," Price said, taking the check. "I'll begin tonight." That evening, the house was quiet. Jonathan was predictably working late. Evelyn was in the kitchen, preparing a salad she had no intention of eating when Grace entered. The girl was holding an envelope. "Excuse me, ma'am. This came in the mail for Mr. Ramsey. It looks important." Evelyn took the envelope. The return address was from the admissions office of Summit Creek Community College. It was addressed to Grace Ramsey. Evelyn's mind worked quickly. Ramsey! Jonathan had told her the agency had given her a last name, Evans, a common, forgettable name. But this was Ramsey. His name. Before Evelyn could question it, Jonathan walked in, his briefcase in hand. He stopped short when he saw the envelope in Evelyn's hand. A flicker of something, panic perhaps, crossed his face before being replaced by a neutral mask. "What's that?" he asked. "Mail for Grace," Evelyn said, watching him. "From the community college." Jonathan took the letter from her, his movements a little too fast. "Oh, right. Junk mail. They send these to everyone." He then turned to Grace. "Did you finish the downstairs windows?" "Yes, sir," Grace mumbled, her eyes on the floor. "Good." He slid the envelope into his briefcase without opening it, the snap of the latch sounding unnaturally loud in the silent room. He then walked past them and down the hall to his office, closing the door firmly behind him. Evelyn looked at Grace. The girl's face was pale. The lie had been clumsy, transparent. It was not junk mail. It was a piece of a puzzle Evelyn was just beginning to assemble. The shared last name, the letter from a college, the furtive way Jonathan had hidden it. It all pointed to a connection deeper and more calculated than that of an employer and his maid. She imagined them planning a new life, one funded by his career and legitimized by her education. The coldness in her chest solidified into a block of ice. Caleb Price's first report arrived via encrypted email precisely at 9 a.m., 2 days after their meeting. Evelyn opened it in the solitude of her study, the morning light cutting sharp lines across the hardwood floor. The report was concise, stripped of all emotion. It was a collection of data points, times, locations, and images. The text confirmed that Jonathan Ramsey had left his office building, as expected, at 5:32 p.m. He had not, however, driven toward their home in the affluent suburbs of Summit Creek. Instead, he had taken the interstate south, exiting into a part of the city Evelyn only knew from newspaper articles about urban decay. The report detailed his movements for the next 3 hours. His car was parked on a dilapidated street in front of a 3-story brick apartment building. The building's facade was crumbling, with several windows boarded up. The report included several photographs, all taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. The images were grainy, shot in the fading light of dusk. They showed Jonathan's polished black sedan, a stark symbol of wealth against the backdrop of poverty. One photo showed him getting out of the car and looking up at the building, his face etched with worry. He was not seen entering, nor was he seen meeting anyone on the street. He simply stood near his car for a time before getting back in and sitting there, in the dark, for nearly 2 hours. Evelyn stared at the photographs. This was not a hotel for a tryst. It was something else. She concluded it must be where Grace lived. He had hired her, installed her in their home, but was still visiting her in this squalid place. Perhaps her family lived there. Perhaps he was supporting them too. The narrative of the affair expanded, becoming a story of a man not just cheating, but creating an entirely separate, secret life in the city's underbelly. Later that day, Evelyn sought out Grace. Underbelly. She found her in the laundry room, meticulously folding a set of linen sheets. Evelyn leaned against the doorframe, projecting an air of casual curiosity. "Grace, I've been meaning to ask. Do you have family here in Summit Creek?" The girl stiffened, her hands pausing over a pillowcase. "No, ma'am, they live far away." "Oh? Where is that?" Evelyn pressed. "Out of state," Grace answered vaguely, her eyes fixed on the stack of linens. "It must be difficult, being in a new city alone," Evelyn continued, her voice soft and probing. "Where are you staying? The agency mentioned they provide a room for you?" "Yes, ma'am, a room," Grace repeated, her nervousness palpable. "It's very nice." The answers were clipped, evasive. The girl was a poor liar. To Evelyn, Her inability to provide simple, straightforward answers was a clear indicator of guilt. She was hiding something, protecting a secret that Evelyn was now certain she shared with Jonathan. The conversation confirmed that Grace was not just a participant in the deceit, but a co-conspirator. That night, Jonathan called at 7:30 p.m. His voice was strained. "Evelyn, I'm so sorry. I'm completely buried here. This waterfront bid is a monster. I'm going to be here until at least midnight. Don't wait up." "Of course, Jonathan. Work hard," she said, her tone perfectly even. She hung up the phone. A cold fury was building inside her. She waited exactly 30 minutes, letting the lie settle in the air between them. At 8 p.m., she picked up the phone again and dialed the main number for his firm, Ramsey and Associates Architects. A young man answered, his voice betraying the boredom of a night receptionist. "Ramsey and Associates." "Hello," Evelyn said, allowing a note of manufactured panic into her voice. "I need to speak to Jonathan Ramsey. It's an emergency, a family matter." "I'm sorry, ma'am," the receptionist said politely. "But Mr. Ramsey isn't here." "That's impossible," Evelyn insisted. "He's working late on the waterfront bid. Please, you must connect me." There was a pause, followed by the soft clicking of a keyboard. "Ma'am, my log shows that Mr. Ramsey signed out for the day at 5:30 p.m. All the senior partners left at the close of business. There's no one from that team here." The confirmation was like a physical blow. It was not a suspicion or an interpretation. It was a fact, delivered by a disinterested third party. The lie was not just a lie. It was a brazen, calculated fabrication. He had not even bothered to construct a plausible scenario. He had assumed she would not check. He had assumed she was a fool. She ended the call without another word. The rage that had been simmering now boiled over. It was a clean, pure anger that burned away any remaining doubt or hope for a simple explanation. Her husband was lying to her. He was involved with the maid. He was frequenting a slum in a dangerous part of the city. The carefully constructed world she inhabited had a deep, structural fracture, and she was now determined to expose it, no matter the cost. Caleb Price's surveillance was no longer enough. She needed to see it for herself. Caleb Price's second report was more damning than the first. It arrived on a Friday morning, and this time, the photographs were sharper, taken in the harsh light of midday. The subject was not a decrepit apartment building, but a pawn shop on a commercial street lined with check-cashing stores and bail bondsmen. The first image showed Jonathan parking his car. The second showed him walking toward the entrance of Summit City Loans and Jewelry. He was holding a small, dark blue, velvet-lined box. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She recognized it instantly. It was the box that held his father's vintage Patek Philippe watch, an heirloom passed down to Jonathan on his 30th birthday. It was the one object he owned that held genuine sentimental value, a link to a man he had deeply admired. The final photograph was the most devastating. It showed Jonathan exiting the shop empty-handed. His shoulders were slumped, his expression grim. He had pawned his father's watch. The act was incomprehensible to Evelyn. They were not in financial distress. Her family's wealth, combined with Jonathan's substantial income, placed them in a stratum where the concept of pawning possessions was alien. There was only one conclusion she could draw. He needed a large sum of untraceable cash. Cash for an apartment for his mistress. Cash to support her family. Cash for a new life that did not include Evelyn. He was liquidating their past to finance his future. That evening, when he came home, early for once, Evelyn decided to confront him, but indirectly. She would test the lie. As he loosened his tie, she walked over to his watch case on the dresser. "I was thinking of having your father's watch serviced," she said, her voice casual. "It's been a while. I don't see it here." Jonathan froze, his hands stilled on his tie. He turned to look at her, his eyes guarded. "It's already being serviced," he said. "I dropped it off last week. The mainspring was acting up." "Oh? Which jeweler did you take it to?" she asked, her gaze unwavering. "I can pick it up when it's ready." A flicker of anger crossed his face. "I'll handle it, Evelyn. It's my watch." He turned away, dismissing the conversation. "I'm under a lot of pressure at work. I don't have time for these questions." His defensiveness was the final piece of evidence. It was a textbook reaction of a guilty man caught in a lie. He was not just deceiving her. He was actively hostile when she came too close to the truth. The exchange solidified her resolve. She called Heather Monroe. "He sold his father's watch," Evelyn said, her voice a monotone. "He lied straight to my face about it." "Cash," Heather responded immediately. "He needed cash. That's always what it is. It's for her. An apartment, a car. Maybe he's paying off some trouble she's in. You have him, Ev. You have the proof." "It's not enough," Evelyn countered. "Photographs of a pawn shop and a rundown apartment are circumstantial. He'll create a story. He'll say he was helping an old friend. A charity case. He will twist it until I am the villain for having him followed. I need more. I need something undeniable." There was a pause on the line. "Then you have to catch him in the act," Heather said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And you know where they feel the safest? Where they get the most arrogant? Your own home. He'll bring her into your space, into your living room, when he thinks you're gone. It's the ultimate thrill, the ultimate betrayal." The image Heather painted was grotesque, but it resonated with a terrifying logic. It was the final arrogant step of a man who believed he was untouchable. "How?" Evelyn asked. "How do I see it without being there?" "Technology, darling," Heather said. "There are cameras so small you could hide them in a button. Nanny cams. You can buy them online. Get one with a live feed you can watch from your phone or a laptop. Set it up, tell him you're going away for a night, and then sit back and watch the show." After the call, Evelyn went to her study. She opened her laptop and searched for high-definition covert surveillance systems. The results were immediate. She scrolled through websites that sold devices disguised as smoke detectors, alarm clocks, and phone chargers. She found what she was looking for: a miniature camera with a wide-angle lens, night vision, and a secure encrypted live streaming audio and video feed. It was small enough to be hidden anywhere. She entered her credit card information without a second thought, paying extra for overnight shipping. This was the point of no return. She was no longer just a suspicious wife. She was an operative, setting a trap in her own home. The coldness inside her was now absolute. She would get her undeniable proof, and she would use it to dismantle Jonathan Ramsey's life as methodically as he was attempting to dismantle hers. The surveillance equipment arrived the next afternoon in a plain brown box, devoid of any identifying marks. Evelyn took it to the guest bedroom, a room seldom used, and locked the door. She unboxed the components with the precision of a surgeon laying out her instruments. The camera itself was a tiny black cube, no larger than a sugar cube, connected by a thin, flexible wire to a small transmitter. Sugar cube. She spent the next hour testing it, connecting it to her home Wi-Fi network, and linking the feed to a secure app on her laptop. The video quality was remarkably clear, the audio sharp enough to pick up a whisper from across the room. The first stage of her plan was complete. The second stage required finding the perfect location. She walked through the living room, analyzing sightlines. The room was large and open plan, with a clear view of the front door, the main seating area, and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. The ideal vantage point was the built-in bookshelf that flanked the fireplace. It was filled with large, hardbound art and architecture books, objects so familiar they were practically invisible. She selected a thick volume on Renaissance sculpture. In her study, she used a craft knife to carefully hollow out a section of the pages, creating a cavity just large enough for the camera and its transmitter. She worked slowly, her hands steady. The act of desecrating the book felt strangely appropriate, a physical manifestation of the violation occurring in her life. She placed the camera inside, the tiny lens peeking through a small hole she had drilled in the book's spine. Back in the living room, she slid the book into its place on the shelf. It was perfect. The camera had an unobstructed view of the entire room. A minor complication arose when she tested the live feed. The signal was unstable, dropping in and out. The thick plaster walls and the distance from her router in the study were causing interference. Frustrated, She retrieved the router and a long Ethernet cable. She moved the device to the living room, concealing it behind a large potted plant near the bookshelf. The technical problem was solved. The signal was now strong and uninterrupted. With the trap set, she needed to create the opportunity. That evening, she approached Jonathan as he was reading in his favorite armchair. "Darling," she said, her tone light and casual, "Heather has invited me for an impromptu overnight spa trip. A new place up in the wine country just opened. We'd leave tomorrow afternoon and be back the following evening." She watched his face for a reaction. It came, not as a word, but as a visible release of tension in his shoulders. His eyes, which had been wary, now brightened with a relief so palpable it was almost an admission. "That sounds wonderful, Evelyn," he said. "You deserve a break. You've been so tense lately." The irony of his words was not lost on her. "I have," she agreed. "I'll go pack a small bag." The following day, just before she was scheduled to leave, Evelyn found Grace dusting in the dining room. She handed her a short list of tasks. "Grace, while I'm away, I'd like you to polish the silver. And the living room could use a thorough dusting, especially the bookshelves. Be careful with the art books. They're quite valuable." It was a calculated risk. She needed to know if the camera's placement was secure. After packing her overnight bag and placing it in the trunk of her car, she drove down the block and parked where she had a clear view of her own front window. She waited. 15 minutes later, she saw Grace's silhouette move into the living room. Evelyn held her breath, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She watched the girl work her way along the bookshelf, her dust cloth passing over the spine of the hollowed-out book, once, twice, without a second glance. Grace was oblivious. The trap was armed and unnoticed. Satisfied, Evelyn started the car. She did not drive north toward the wine country. She drove to a sterile, anonymous hotel near the Summit Creek Airport, a place for transient people, with no questions asked. She checked in under her maiden name, paid in cash, and requested a room with a high-speed internet connection. Inside the room, which smelled of disinfectant and faint despair, she unpacked nothing. She simply removed her laptop from its case, placed it on the small desk facing the window, and powered it on. The city's lights were beginning to flicker on as dusk settled. Powered it on. She logged into the secure server, and the live feed from her living room filled the screen. The image was stable, the room empty and silent. Her vigil had begun. The hotel room was cold. Evelyn ignored the thermostat, pulling the desk chair closer to the laptop. On the screen, her living room was cast in the warm, artificial glow of its evening lamps. The image was so clear, she could see the dust motes dancing in the beams of light. The audio feed picked up the faint, ambient hum of the house, the refrigerator cycling in the kitchen, the distant rush of water as Grace presumably showered in her quarters. The first few hours were excruciatingly mundane. At 6:45 p.m., Grace walked through the living room, dressed now in simple jeans and a sweater. She went into the kitchen, and Evelyn heard the sounds of a microwave and a cabinet opening and closing. The girl was eating alone. A few minutes later, she returned, rinsed a plate in the sink just out of frame, and walked back toward her room. The house fell silent again. Jonathan arrived at 7:10 p.m. Evelyn watched him enter through the front door, the camera capturing his exhausted posture. He dropped his briefcase on the floor and loosened his tie, his shoulders slumping. He looked haggard, older than he had that morning. He too went to the kitchen. Evelyn saw him open the refrigerator, remove something, and then lean against the counter, eating directly from a container. It was the joyless, functional meal of a man who believed he was alone. After a few minutes, he disappeared down the hallway toward their bedroom. Evelyn sat, her eyes unblinking, fixed on the screen. She felt a strange detachment, as if she were a scientist observing a specimen. There was no rage, no anxiety, just a cold, patient certainty. Heather was right. He had needed the house to be empty. The performance was about to begin. For nearly 2 hours, nothing happened. Jonathan did not reemerge. The silence in the house was absolute. Evelyn began to wonder if she had miscalculated, if perhaps tonight was not the night. She checked her watch. 8:55 p.m. Then she saw movement. Jonathan appeared from the hallway. He was showered, dressed in a clean shirt and slacks. He looked less tired, more purposeful. He walked across the living room and stopped at the hallway leading to the staff quarters. He stood there for a moment, then knocked softly on Grace's door. "Grace!" His voice came through the laptop's speakers, clear and distinct. "Can you come out to the living room for a minute? There's something we need to discuss." Evelyn leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. This was it, the moment of betrayal, staged in the heart of their home. A few seconds later, Grace appeared. She looked nervous, her hands twisting in front of her. She followed Jonathan to the large sofa that sat directly in the camera's line of sight. They sat down, leaving a careful, formal distance between them. The atmosphere, even through the digital feed, was thick with tension. Jonathan did not speak immediately. He reached down and opened his briefcase, which he had retrieved from the foyer. He took out a thick, legal-sized manila envelope. It was bulging. He placed it on the coffee table between them. Evelyn used the app's controls to zoom in. The camera's lens pushed closer, the image remaining sharp. The envelope was unsealed. Through the opening at the top, she could see the edges of currency. It was full of cash, stacks of it. Her breath hitched. The pawned watch. The long hours. The secret trips to the blighted parts of the city. It had all been to accumulate this. A payoff. A severance. Money for the maid to disappear and start a new life, funded by the sale of his family's history. A cold, bitter sense of victory washed over Evelyn. It was more brazen, more transactional than she had even imagined. She had him. The proof was right there, in a fat manila envelope, sitting on her coffee table. She reached for the volume control on her laptop, turning it up. She wanted to hear every single word. Evelyn increased the audio volume just as Jonathan began to speak. His voice was low, heavy with a weariness she had never heard before. "This is from the last 2 months of overtime at the warehouse," he said, pushing the envelope toward Grace. His words made no sense. Warehouse? Grace shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. "John, it's too much." "You can't keep doing this." "It's not too much," he insisted, his voice firm but gentle. "This should cover your fall semester tuition and the books. The university sent the final bill. We can't get behind." Evelyn stared at the screen. The words registered, but her mind refused to process them. "Tuition? University? I just wish Mom and Dad could see this," Jonathan continued, his gaze softening as he looked at the young woman beside him. "They would be so proud of you, Gracie. Getting into the state university, after everything that's happened. You're the first one in our family to go." The name, Gracie. It was not the name of a lover. It was the name of a little sister. The conversation continued, and with each sentence, the foundation of Evelyn's reality crumbled into dust. Grace was not some girl he had picked up. She was Grace Ramsey, his younger sister. The story spilled out, a raw, painful confession not meant for Evelyn's ears. Their parents, who Evelyn had met only a handful of times, and whom Jonathan had always described as retired and traveling, had not been traveling. Their small construction business in a town upstate had gone bankrupt a year ago. They had lost everything: the business, their home, their savings. The run-down apartment building from Price's first report. That was where Jonathan had moved them. He was paying their rent, their utilities, their food. He had pawned his father's watch, not for a mistress, but to cover an emergency medical bill when their father had a heart scare. The shame of his family's failure had been too much for him to admit to her, to the wealthy, successful woman he had married. He had hired Grace as a maid under a false name because she had nowhere else to go, and he knew his own prideful sister would never accept charity. It was a way to give her a safe home, a wage, and the dignity of work, without having to explain the humiliating truth to Evelyn, whose judgment he clearly feared. And the late nights. The endless, exhausting late nights were not spent at his firm or with a lover. They were spent at a second grueling job. After leaving his prestigious architecture firm at 5:30 p.m., he drove to the industrial district. He worked a 6 p.m. to 1 a.m. shift as a night watchman for Falcon Protective, a security company. He patrolled a desolate, sprawling warehouse complex, walking miles each night. The grease stain was from a faulty loading dock door. The truck stop diner was where he got his one meal. The extra income, every single dollar of it, was going to his parents' survival and to his sister's college tuition. On the screen, Grace was crying openly now, tears of gratitude and sorrow. "You're killing yourself, John," she sobbed. "No," he said, putting an arm around her, a gesture of pure brotherly comfort. "I'm taking care of my family. It's what we do. We just have to hold on until you get your degree. Then you can help. We're a team." Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs. The camera, her instrument of righteous justice, had instead captured a scene of profound, heartbreaking sacrifice. The man she had painted as a deceitful, callous adulterer was, in reality, a son and a brother, shouldering an impossible burden in secret, protecting his family from ruin while simultaneously trying to protect his marriage from what he perceived would be her shame or pity. The cruelty of her suspicion, of her clinical investigation, of her cold satisfaction just moments before, crashed down on her. She had not been hunting a villain. She had been hunting a hero. She stumbled back from the desk, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. A wave of nausea rose in her throat. She ran to the hotel bathroom, fell to her knees before the toilet, and was violently, wretchedly sick. The image from the laptop was burned into her mind. Jonathan holding his sister, his face a mask of exhaustion and love. Her marriage was not being shattered by infidelity. It had been shattered by her own cold, suspicious heart, by a chasm of mistrust so deep that she had never even considered the simplest of truths, that her husband was a good man. Evelyn drove through the pre-dawn streets of Summit Creek. The city was still asleep, bathed in the gray, flat light that comes before the sunrise. She drove automatically, her mind a void. The hotel room, the laptop, the live feed, it all felt like a fever dream. The only reality was the crushing weight of what she had seen and heard. She pulled into the driveway of her own home. The house was dark and silent. She let herself in, the click of the lock echoing in the stillness. She walked past the living room, averting her eyes from the bookshelf that held the tiny, silent witness to her failure. Their bedroom was empty. The bed was still perfectly made, the pillows uncreased. He had not slept there. A cold spike of fear, different from the suspicion she had harbored before, went through her. She checked Grace's room. The door was closed. She walked through the silent house, her footsteps soft on the cool tiles of the kitchen floor. And there he was. Jonathan was asleep in a chair at the kitchen table, his head resting on his folded arms. He was still fully dressed in the clothes he'd worn on the video feed. Next to him on the table was a neatly folded dark blue uniform. It was a simple work shirt and trousers. On the sleeve of the shirt was a stitched patch, a stylized bird of prey, and the words Falcon Protective. Beside the uniform sat a dented stainless steel thermos and a half-eaten sandwich in wax paper. This was the wreckage of his other life, left on their kitchen table. The evidence was not of an affair, but of a secret life of labor and exhaustion. He was not leading a double life of pleasure, but one of profound, solitary responsibility. Evelyn stood there for a long time, just watching him sleep. His face, usually so composed and confident, was slack with exhaustion. There were dark circles under his eyes. He looked vulnerable, and for the first time in months, she felt a surge of love so powerful it was physically painful. She reached out and gently touched his shoulder. He woke with a violent start, his head snapping up. His eyes were wide and disoriented. He saw her, and his entire body went rigid. His expression hardened into a defensive mask, the one she had seen so many times before when she questioned him. He was preparing for a fight, for an accusation about why she was home early. But Evelyn did not attack. She pulled another chair from the table and sat down opposite him, her hands folded in her lap. She looked at the uniform, then back at his face. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet and broken. "Greg," she said, her use of his full name a signal of the gravity of the moment. "Tell me about your parents. Tell me everything." His defensive posture faltered. He stared at her, searching her face for the familiar glint of accusation, of anger. He found none. He saw only a deep, bottomless sorrow. He looked at the uniform on the table, then back at her. The fight went out of him, replaced by a weariness that seemed to bone deep. And then he broke. The story came out, not in a flood, but in a slow, halting narrative. He told her about his father's pride, about the shame of the bankruptcy, about the fear of telling her. He was afraid she would see him and his family as a failure, a financial liability. He had come from a world of modest means, while she had never known anything but security. He could not bear the thought of her pity. "I just wanted to fix it," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I thought I could hold it all together on my own. Work harder, keep it separate. I didn't want to bring this into our home, into your life." Evelyn listened, tears streaming silently down her face. She did not interrupt. She let him purge the secrets, the fears, the shame he had carried alone for more than a year. When he finally fell silent, his head bowed, the first rays of dawn were filtering through the kitchen window. "I installed a camera, Jonathan," she confessed, her voice thick with self-loathing. "In the living room. I watched you last night. I watched you and Grace." He looked up, his face a mixture of shock and a strange, sad understanding. He looked up. He did not have to ask why. He already knew. "I am so sorry," she said, the words utterly inadequate. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. His was rough, calloused in a way it had never been before. "My suspicion, my cruelty. I have been a stranger to you. I forgot what it meant to be a partner, to be a family." She stood up, went to the phone, and made a call to her financial advisor. Her instructions clear and immediate. She was transferring a significant sum of money into their joint account. She returned to the table. "We are going to help them," she said, her voice gaining a strength she hadn't felt in years. "Together, we will find your parents a better apartment, a place they can be comfortable. We will pay for Grace's tuition from our account. And you," she looked at the Falcon protective uniform, "are quitting that job today." Jonathan stared at her, his eyes full of a pain and a relief so profound he couldn't speak. The foundation of their marriage, built on wealth and appearances and quiet assumptions, was a ruin. But standing in that ruin, in the early morning light, surrounded by the evidence of their shared failure, they had found something new to build upon. A painful, humbling, and unforgiving truth. It was not an end. It was a beginning.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.